Hello. Today, I want to tell you something both astounding and boring. I want to talk about two games, but really, two series of places from those games. Two places whose world, architecture, and layout tell a story. It is a story of humankind. It is a story that is felt, not written. Despite the different creators and their different exact ideas about what that might be, it in many ways is the exact same story, born of human fear, human hope, and the meta-narrative. The easiest place to start is, as always, with a bit of context. Once, in a fascinating moment of youth, I happened to be shown a film. That film is so popular I won't waste time recapping its story, creator, or events. I'll get right to the point, the important point. That part that has haunted me for the entirety of my life since that time. In front of the great tree lay a tablet. What did its writing say? What could it say? It was maddening. Ruins bewitched me like nothing else. The weight of those centuries of time, countless lives lived and lost and loved, between their now sand-strewn and overgrown walls. Nothing is quite so melancholic as ruins. Nothing so alluring as the surviving piece of cultures who built them, tantalizingly presenting some fragment of their creator's story, while vulnerably still wasting away to the elements, rain, wind, and sun. Of course, as an adult, I realize all too simply what was written on that tablet doesn't matter. In some ways, it's a red herring. Emotionally, you already know the story. We all do. It's merely the cognizant human mind eating away at something it hopes to concretely rest its thoughts on. Now, the simple question to ask is this: how can I, you, or anyone already know this story? How can disparate peoples create multiple works all underscored by the same thing? The answer lies in the title of this video, the meta-narrative. Don't even begin to ask what it is. It already exists inside your brain. It is the story of you, your family, your city, your country, your community, your race. It is the reason we leave milk and cookies for a bearded man who does not exist. The meta-narrative surrounds us. It binds us. Narrative beings are we, not merely crude matter. Whether you hate it or you love it, it is something humans have made for and lived within for centuries, retelling and rewriting age after age. And if a corporation tries to use this logic to shit out horrible sequels, remind them they can never own it and you go explode in a ditch. And the best part is, it doesn't even need to be true. It merely needs to feel true. And in front of us, in these two games, and these places that they show us, lies essentially an identical fragment of the exact same meta-narrative. Before we go forward, let me add now, I need zero lore to prove this. I don't need a stupid item description. I don't need pedantic interpret it for me, lore video crap. Functionally, everything I tell you is already right in front of your face right now. Has been if you've played these before, and will be should you decide to play these works in the future. What we are essentially looking at here is a modern human interpretation of the course of civilization. That series of paintings, made, well, quite a while ago, chart an imagined course, a character arc we feel to be the natural series of events. This perception has existed for thousands of years, but our recent industrialized, postmodern world has warped it somewhat. The first game starts you off in, well, a desert. Now, as much as I personally adore deserts, it is a markedly empty place. It is a blank slate to set the stage for our story. The only obvious guide is the mountain. Before long, you stumble across this field of markers, and given their size and shape, it is only natural to wonder just what they represent. The answer is given to you quite quickly with the first of these walls. These walls, like that one which stood in front of that great tree, are trickling of the context of what we see in front of us. Throughout the game, they are more or less your only basic means of showing more information not obviously coded into the landscape. In this case, it shows that the inhabitants of this land, who look to be just like you, except they all got sleepy.
We are all sleepy, time for a nap.
Okay, but seriously, it's a mass grave. Something not good happened here. There is a reason this place is in ruins, and it should be clear why the desert is slowly eroding and swallowing it up. The creators of this land are gone. As you proceed ahead, you move through a central hub area, after which you get here. A huge canyon. All these massive remnants of bridges, heading towards something, your goal, the mountain, something big. The reason this works is pretty simple. We live in modern cities. We know that when many highways or railways, for example, combine, they are implying a much larger center up ahead. That is what this area is doing. Functionally, mechanically, we only needed one bridge. There only needed to be this one broken access way, yet we are shown many. This is something our other game as well also uses in its Lost Izalith location, to imply something massive in scale, but only need to make a part of it. You use the implication of larger infrastructure to say, now this is broken, but once it was a mighty place. Importantly, we move past the remains in the next area of something noticeably different. It appears to be a kind of sculpture. The obvious change in materiality is the first hint of what lies ahead. In a great pit, a heavy, deep mechanical tone rings out, and we are being shown something specific. A machine, still alive, still working, chugging on from the days of yore when the civilization thrived and lived. There's a connection here, but I'll return to that in just a bit. Switching to our other story, in many ways we have very obvious parallels. Emerging from a tree-enveloped hollow, we fight a demonic thing, and we already know something has gone not well. If creatures like this have infested nearby, then the kingdom of Ulasil is not doing so well. From here we move into the Guardian Sanctuary, a place most people probably blow right past, but it is very strange. Okay, yes, it has a talking mushroom, but that's not what I mean. It specifically has this ring of humanoid statues. Are these graves? Are these representations of those who guarded this place? What is abundant is this place feels quite nice. The sun is bright and yellow, and birds sing. It is overgrown, but it is not a defiled place. This is important for what likewise lies ahead. Over some bridges we find something fascinating. The first two enemies of this area, which once again are easy to blow past if you simply don't think about what they are. In function, we have come face to face with a part of our narrative, our meta-narrative, the automaton. Not unlike the robot from whatever that movie was, even if the status of Ulasil as a kingdom is very downhill, the machines, or entities, made from its learning, be it magic or technology, or whatever, are still functioning. You can see it in the gardener golems, themselves made of bundles of twigs, and using garden tools, trimming trees and hedges with their pitchforks. Even the stone automatons are here some kind of defense system of Ulasil. Their hard stone bodies are tough to take down, and they act as protectors, even if their kingdom is in ruins. Protectors and gardeners. These automatons suggest something. They are a living melancholic reminder and indicator of how great this civilization once was. It could create artificial life, something that could do work that normally only people could do. Protect them, the fact that they carry on, essentially makes them silent sentinels to a kind of implied greatness. But that is also why it is melancholic and sad, exactly because their masters are so long gone. The thing they serve is no more. They've become a servant to a process which now serves no one. And so returning to our first example, we can begin to see the parallels. That massive rotating machine is doing something. It is doing just that. The remains you find are the same thing. We are told the importance of the mountain. From the mountain emerges this energy. It is shown creating life, animals and crops, of which none remain. But also, it creates these weaving, folding scraps of fabric. The fabric here is a symbol of many things. It symbolizes knowledge, learning. Its form holds and shows the imagery of the world made into being. It also represents clothing, technology, and perhaps in a broad sense, civilization itself. This one symbol here is shown so ubiquitously to mean all that in just this single entity. And now, notice, where do you find these scraps of technology attached to? That's right, the remains of the flying snake machine. And what is right next to each other in the large drumming machine? That's also right, the heads of those snake creatures, and a massive container of the flying, floating fabric beings. We are being directly told and shown that in essence, the same thing has happened here as with Ulasil. The fabric represents technology and life. The civilization of this land used this to make artificial life in the form of these machine vehicles. The message between the two is clear. The people who made this place had a mastery over the systems of the world. These things represent to us all the tools we see today, and like 2001's Bone to Space Station transition, we are being shown the tool taking its final form. But in truth, we are reliving the upwards expansion of these lands, and now we must remember they have fallen. We as well need to trace this downward spiral. In Ulasil, the first bad sign is the hole in the ground. Not the cliffs, but the oozing holes emanating fumes and corruption. And you think, oh no, they started fracking, didn't they? Okay, but seriously, the light grows dimmer and dimmer, the holes appear, and you get to the cliff overlooking what's left of the city itself. In one of the best visual indicators of this whole setup I've ever seen in fiction, it's collapsed. Literally, it has sunken. This isn't poetic fallacy, this is poetic cataclysm. If your head hurts, it's the meta-narrative clubbing you over the head with the message at this moment. If, in our mind's image of the Golden Age, we have spires and towers shooting up from the Great Hill, then this immediately tells us visually that things have gone bad. If those woods we move through are the royal woods of Ulasil, one might ask a simple question. Where's the castle of which that royalty, whose woods belong to, now exists? There it is. Down there, at the bottom of the pit. Needless to say, things have not gone well. Things have gone very bad. Notice as well the arena where we fight Artorias. Ignoring the fight and Artorias himself, the placement is really strange. This whole story is named after him, and yet he's fought only halfway through. The reason why is obvious. There's only two ways out of that sunken kingdom. The elevators, now out of service, and, well, the arena. The arena here is for just that, a crumbling barrier point. Whatever is in that city down below cannot escape. Thus, Artorias had to place himself here to remain and fight. And so after defeating him, we begin likewise our descent into that place. We are bluntly, emotionally being told, you are going over the threshold. The cheery birdsong of earlier is gone. Now there is only the slight rumblings of storm, the screaming cries of something or someone down below. And most interestingly, all around us sits the crumbling towers of Ulasil. This setting might be medieval, but the parallel is simple. It's the crumbling towers of our modern skyscrapers. The descent of Ulasil as a civilization paralleled in its slow collapse into that abyssal pit. Returning, we basically see the exact same thing. The spread of civilization on the land, the prosperity, the golden sun shining down on all these bridges and what they were leading to. The central, massive city. Its golden age, like the giant stadium of Ulasil. Then, as well, the fall. Down into the foundations of that city. We see its collapsed catwalks, the pipes that once inside flowed the fabric knowledge that made this civilization thrive. It could have carried water, or oil, or electricity. In the end, it doesn't matter. And so we come face to face with those automatons of this land. We are shown what occurred. They pushed too far. The resources from the mountain, its life energy that it could no longer provide. War between the beings who lived there occurred. The weapon tools were turned on each other instead. Death ensued, and the civilization collapsed. In Ulasil, we find the denizens of what were once the inhabitants of this place, now mutated into eldritch creatures, wild and demented, driven mad. This place, once famous for its wondrous magic and sorcerers, they likewise pushed too far and upset a primordial balance. As we descend into Ulasil, the light grows dimmer and dimmer. Symbolically, Ulasil's collapse was not just a sinkhole, its collapse was into corruption and imbalance itself, its towers now crumbling and leaning onto one another, as sickened blue veins grow upwards from that pit. But here I will say I did somewhat lie. While it is true both stories make use of the same meta-narrative, of the course of civilization, where they differ speaks to their final conclusion. It begins slowly, with you emerging from the foundations of the city, into a gigantic room. A room that is lighting up with your activation of the walls. They now show the areas you have journeyed through. The game and its architecture are now hinting at the final conclusion. Water, which has been mostly non-present up until now, fills the room, as well as glowing light and fabric creatures as they rise up. This vertical movement and its imagery is saying something. The ascent back to vitality. The ascent from death, of conflict, and the return of knowledge and the vitality of life. In the jellyfish-like creatures made of that fabric knowledge, and the massive winged serpent. Until at the top we reach the cold winds of the mountain. We are nearly there, but the cold winds sap our energy bit by bit. We are hunted by more and more of the automatons, and after struggling as hard as possible to make it up, we collapse. And this is the turning point. In Ulasil, we move through the massive keep of its castle, across the broken surfaces of fallen buildings, and we can just know the very civilization itself is being broken down by that imbalance I mentioned before. Across the fallen main entrance we fight, and inside all the grim clues are showing themselves to you. The statues of the magic users of this land have their heads removed. The mutated inhabitants' heads are cracked and covered in eyes. I don't think I need to point out why. A thing comes out to fight you, a mutated blob of a creature strapped to a log and wound around with an iron ball. And when you defeat it, there's only one direction, and it is down, into the dungeons of that place, where you see the blue substance everywhere. The bars on the cells are all torn, and in the final cell, the last bonfire you find, and has many, many chains. From the darkness beyond, there is no screams anymore, just a low rumbling. Whatever they upset and tried to control, emerged from this place. And so, the final conclusion of these two stories, and how they show their meta-narrative, and their story, their message summed up. In the first, your collapse is only momentary. As you fall, the spirits of the white beings you meet up here imbue you with the power to rocket up to the summit of that mountain. Up above the structures and collapse from before, they're all gone. All that exists here is the pure flowing waters of the mountaintop, the pure knowledge creatures of the fabric dancing upon great shrines like pillars to guide you. As you enter into the mountain, the chasm, the bright source of light, the game ends. The mountain launches out a shooting energy like the one that created the life of the old civilization. As the credits roll, you retrace the locations you've been to, and in the end are reborn as another cloaked being where you began. In the latter, you move through that jail cell into a massive cave. Inside, there are a few more mutated denizens, but pushing deeper into that ancient space, you see the humanoid forms. These things, they damage you on contact, but at the same time, it's hard to ascribe an emotion to their movement. They are pure, but in a very different way, a primordial way. Something ancient, something predating Ulasil, civilization, knowledge, or magic. Down in the depths of that place, along a massive collapsed stone stalactite, you descend. The final boss and enemy lies at the lowest point. Once again, his fight does not matter. What does matter is his room. A circle of ancient monolithic pillars surrounding a human-sized grave. The message here is simple and blunt. This place is old. It in many ways is the oldest possible place. Like the burial mounds of old Europe or the Kofun mounds of Japan. A transgression against something absolute and impossibly ancient has occurred. So what is the collective story of these two? What are they telling us? What does that in turn tell us about our current civilization? Is any of it true? In essence, both begin with a near similar arc. A story of civilization expanding outwards, bountiful and smart, capable of replicating life itself with its knowledge. Only then to go too far in some way. For Journey, it was a symbolic resource of the mountain, representing water or food or knowledge. Once more, it really does not matter. What matters is that it was overstretched. For Ulasil, it was the yearning for more knowledge and advancement, their desires leading them to violate a primordial space, to push into something old and ancient best left undisturbed, to unearth something laid to rest. In both, there is a fundamental story. The story of the fear of the collapse, of the fear of our own civilization, but also ancient ones as well, going too far and disturbing a deeper cycle. Of the life cycle of that civilization, its start, its growth, its golden age, and its fall. Both examples make use of that cycle, but do conclude in slightly different ways. The first concluded on a cycle of rebirth, of a Buddhist-like ascent, of an experience based on learning the story of that collapse, of accepting it before returning to the source of that world's life, the mountain, and returning to the cycle, its understanding of that history. It existed through using its ruins and buildings and then transcending beyond it. For the other, for Ulasil, it is one of greed of knowledge pushing them into violating a primordial balance. In doing so, their lands are corrupted, their people are corrupted, and the structures themselves are corrupted and collapse into that abyss. But in spite of that, we do descend to fight that abyss. We cannot save Ulasil, but we can try to make amends for that transgression. In many ways, this lines up with that game's central theme, of persisting in the face of that inevitability. Of course, now I must responsibly say most of this is bullshit. Civilizations do not cleanly rise and fall. The Mayans went back into the jungle when the hard times came. Rome, as in Western Rome, largely transmuted itself into a myriad of following cultures. In reality, civilizations do not cleanly and calmly and nicely die in a dramatic end of perfect finality. That is a human anxious notion of the path of those civilizations. But then again, it doesn't really need to be true, just feel true. And more likely, these stories are not experiences of the past, of the fall of civilization in its course. The inclusion of technology so centrally, and the balance of that nature especially marks them out. In the old stories, it is a decadence that befalls and then causes the collapse of civilization. Men growing weak, and then in turn having their civilization grow weak. But if these two stories use the metanarrative, but don't use that conclusion, then what do they use? That really only leaves one possibility. These worlds, their places, and their story must instead be some kind of warning for the future, imploring us to take heed before it is too late, attempting to draw parallels to our mastery of the science and the world. Take responsibility of our part in the cycles of the world and the danger we face in disturbing them with our hubris. The reason these stories are so similar is that you could try to look at who made them, when and how, the kinds of people who would make them, try to logic it out and define it, use demographics and so on. But as all of this, the answer is right in front of you. It is something felt, not known. This universal warning of the possible futures of an arrogant civilization and its transgression of the world that gave rise to its ascent. But at the same time, how absurd. Imagine how much effort it would take to make a long story about that, to make people feel that warning. But then again, what would I know about making anything like that at all?